Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. We've got the review of the latest High Republic adult novel, Temptation of the Force by Tessa Gratton for you all. We're going to give you our thoughts, non-spoiler, for the latest book from the High Republic. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Star Wars content. We do cover every single High Republic book when they come out, so you can check out our reviews every single time. If you're subscribed, we're also covering The Acolyte, which is technically a High Republic release. If you're interested in The Acolyte, we do live streams every single week. It will be at 7 p.m. Pacific because the episodes come out at 6 p.m. Pacific. We're going to get on right after the episodes air, and we're going to give you our thoughts on The Acolyte. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into Temptation of the Force, and we usually break this down into two different parts for our review. We start with the plot and the writing, the way the narrative unfolded, how this book was structured, all the general stuff about the book review, and then we'll get into characters. But to start off the plot section here, Sanak, what did you think of Temptation of the Force?
Yeah, it is a story that very much feels like you're just catching up to the middle of the arc, and then it kind of goes out fairly softly. It doesn't really have any massive like advancements or developments and comes to this pinnacle at the very end of its plotting. It definitely does feel like a story that reaches its peak pretty close through halfway into the story. This is also a book that is very much one of the first uh, adult novels that is like beholden to the young adult novel that's come before it. It very much feels like a sequel to that. And I think it does balance it pretty well. But you do have to spend a lot of that first 20 to 25% of the plot rehashing some things, catching people up on things that they didn't read in Defy the Storm. One thing that we really pointed out in our review of Defy the Storm is that we wanted to see a lot of these really interesting developments that came out of it actually have some weight and effect on the world. And this book is definitely saying like, yeah, that's happening. We're going to talk about it. We're going to deal with it. We're going to have these characters who weren't necessarily tied into that story have their own experiences and interchanges with that. And that's all cool. And I think if you're looking for the High Republic novels at the very least to feel like they're all worthwhile, this is definitely the first book in a long time that I can say really feels like everything is piecing together well. But the flip side of that is you have to go through a little bit of a like growing into phase for the story. So I will say another thing that wasn't distracting for me, but it definitely felt like anytime the story was close to getting somewhere, it started meandering, was the fact that a lot of the more disconnected characters and their plot lines, especially Marchion Ro, it just felt like a lot of interludes. It didn't necessarily feel like we were getting a lot of the story being tied directly back into like a lot of this very hero focused journey, a lot of the stuff that's happening in the inclusion zone, and characters that were like more directly tied into like an individual hero and individual Jedi in previous books. For the most part, are on their own, kind of left their own devices, have their own chapters. But anytime it almost started like it's going to fully meander, it cut back to like another new development, another new understanding of the things that are happening in the galaxy, between the Nihil, between the Jedi. So it kept my attention consistent throughout. It just had some ebbs and flows more than I expected.
Yeah, I completely agree. This book is a middle chapter. It's got, unfortunately, some of the weaker sides of middle chapters, like an Iron Man 2. Not necessarily that bad, but that kind of thing where you're setting up the finale, basically. We are doing a lot of setup. And if there has been any book in the High Republic adult novel series that is a character book, it's Temptation of the Force. This is a book that relies heavily on its characters, your pre-attachment to its characters, and your interest and kind of excitement towards seeing what happens next for our characters, both in their interpersonal relationships and their role kind of in the state of the galaxy. So if that's what you're interested in and that's what you love about the High Republic, then you might really love this book. And I really liked this book. I can't say I absolutely loved it. There were a lot of things that I enjoyed quite a bit about the plotting. Like I do think getting more and more of a look behind the storm wall was something that was really interesting, and seeing how the Republic continues to press their advantage on the Nile after some of their victories that they had in the Eye of Darkness, and Defy the Storm, I thought were worthwhile evolutions of those two stories. It was something that I was very much into, even though the first, I would say maybe 15 chapters or so, the chapters in this are pretty short, but the first 15, 20 chapters, it takes a little bit of getting back into because it does recap a lot of Defy the Storm. It was a complaint I also had about Defy the Storm. I've been wondering too, like, is this the standard for the High Republic moving forward? Because like you mentioned, this has not been the standard for the High Republic throughout the initiative. Usually young adult characters stay in young adult, junior novel characters stay in junior novels, or sometimes go up. But the one consistent thing about the High Republic has been that whatever author is tackling whatever story, they bring their characters over. And so I feel like a lot of the connections between this and Defy the Storm are because Tessa Gratton co-wrote Defy the Storm as well. I don't really expect that same level of connectivity to continue throughout the rest of the initiative. As somebody who does read everything, I did appreciate that. It made me like a lot of parts about Defy the Storm a bit more than I did. I still have very similar complaints with the first half, but the ending especially I think works a lot better. There's one thing in the epilogue of Defy the Storm that I don't necessarily think was quite as exciting as it really could have been. And in this book, it wasn't handled quite as well. But overall, I enjoyed the plotting of this. I completely agree, though, about the interlude feel. Marchion Ro specifically is notably absent from this story. And he's kind of been absent from all the stories since Rising Storm. He's very much so, they're biding their time with this character, and hopefully we get a satisfying conclusion for him. Porter Engle was the other one that feels like his story is kind of just there to set up whatever comic series Charles Soule has coming next. And that's a little bit of a disappointment because he was so great in the last book, in Eye of Darkness. One of my favorite parts of the book was Porter Engle. It is a bit disappointing, and it is victim, like a lot of these High Republic things have been post Rising Storm, to just the fact that we have this massive initiative. But overall, a solidly written book in terms of, wording and structure and all that. I just do think it falls victim and trap to a lot of things we've seen before with this initiative. And in a lot of ways, by doubling down on the connectivity, it does lose a bit of its momentum. But let's talk about those characters. Like I mentioned, Marchion Ro, notably absent from this book. I mean, he's in it, but very little page time, and a lot of the book is about them wondering where is he. But there are a lot of great characters in this book, and a lot of them are the characters who have continued from Light of the Jedi all the way into this fifth book here now, like Avar Kriss, Elzar Mann, Bel Zettifar, Buri Yaga. We've seen a lot of growth and development for a lot of these characters. Out of all the characters that are in this book, Sanak, which one stood out most to you?
Well, it's got to be the characters on the cover, right? It is Elzar's book. It is Avar's book. It is that dynamic that has been teased and kind of employed in bits and pieces throughout these novels, but has definitely been implied to take another real step of bonding, of togetherness, of like examination at the end of Light of Darkness. It is for the romance lovers out there very much dealing with their dynamic and their connection to each other. What that means in a world without Stellan Gios, what that means this long into the conflict. And it really does feel like these characters both have aged and learned a lot from their experiences. Avar, especially, I think this was one of her best books and her best appearances in a while. You know, you get to see a lot of how much she is still that character, that light of the Jedi, but how much he has also changed in a lot of ways. Elzar has definitely gotten a lot of development too, and he has gone from being almost brash and fully Anakin-like to almost like inverted within himself. Like now he's been questioning everything, and that does come from a lot of his relationship with Stellan there, the missing link that he has between himself and Avar, the link that he has between himself and the Jedi he thinks he needs to be, the link that he has with Chancellor Lina So, which has been a pretty interesting development here in Phase 3. But how does that really connect with like the Jedi Council and the roles that he's played in his own journey with the Force and the darkness and the brushes that he's had with it? If you're someone who doesn't love romance in Star Wars novels, I will say this is definitely better handled. It is a lot of development because you're 5 novels into this relationship, this friendship, this what ifs that have been coming. Also a big fan of Buryaga. I think he's been someone who's been mostly playing secondary to Belzetifar and a lot of the storytelling, and it is still a little hard to write for a character who doesn't speak in basic and speak in English, right? He still is a Wookiee that is also, and especially throughout this book, very much against having proper like translator droid like a Lobaka. He's like, I want my fellow Jedi to like speak on behalf of me and all that. It does make Bell a little bit more of just like a translator option or like filling the gaps. But I think because he's had so much of his story told so far throughout these adult novels, having him take a little bit of a backseat and have Buryaga take the lead here, especially since their part of the story deals with a lot of a very similar species to Wookiees, and a lot of the empathy and a lot of this uniqueness that he has as a Force user. You really did get to see his story shine, and he leaves on a very interesting cliff point, right? Like you're ready for to see what he's about to reveal, and then the story kind of shifts more to that grander story outline and focus there. I'm very excited to see what he's going to do. I hope we don't have to wait necessarily till the final novel of the final adult novel of this initiative. Even then, I think those three, and they quite often have a lot of scenes together, really good stuff there.
Absolutely. Those are the three standout characters of this book. Elzar and Avar was something that I feel was very earned for the story. It was kind of about time we got back to this relationship, especially because Avar, one of the things I prefer about Light of the Jedi to Rising Storm and the Fallen Star is that Avar is basically not in those two books at all, and she is the main character of Light of the Jedi. She's the one that kind of starts us off in the High Republic and gets this whole journey going. And that connection, that relationship between her and Elzar was something I really enjoyed and gravitated towards in the first book. And it's been ignored for a while until Eye of Darkness brings it back, but more in a spiritual way because they're separated. They've gone through so much. And I thought Tessa Gratton did an amazing job with their relationship. All the stuff that they're in, not just the more romantic moments, but also the moments where they work together on the battlefield. This book is in a lot of ways about love and about empathy, not just between these two and not just romantically, but about how those types of feelings, how the emotions that the Jedi, especially prequel Jedi, we are taught they should be repressing, how do those help them combat their greatest enemy, these force eaters, these things that just absolutely take everything about them and twist it and manipulate it and destroy it. How can we weaponize our own love towards the Nihil and their chaos? And I feel like that's one thing that works incredibly well in this book from start to finish. It's in page one and it goes all the way to the very end. And I loved what Tessa Gratton did with that. It's something very different. It's very unique for the High Republic. And I think in a lot of ways, it's a great evolution of this time period, especially as we creep closer and closer to the Phantom Menace and the Acolyte, where those things are basically shut off from the Jedi forever. It's one of the things that forces Anakin to the dark side, right? Seeing how it can be worked into a positive light, I thought was a risky idea, but one that ultimately paid off in this story. And so those characters work extremely well for that. And Buryaga being our empath of the adult novels, this is by far the most Buryaga has been a character and not just a cool Jedi Wookiee who walks around and has some cool fights but doesn't really do much. He is a character in this, and this is the first time he feels like he's contributing to the narrative. I did like seeing Vernestra also elevated to finally getting roles in an adult novel. She's not in it too much. She gets her moments, but she does have some really good moments. And I like seeing that for a character who's been given so much importance across the entirety of this franchise. And Avon Starros, who I've also like enjoyed since the Test of Courage, but being a part of that kind of young adult crew hasn't necessarily been one of my favorite characters. I thought the way the Starros family in general is used in this book was the most I've enjoyed them in the entirety of this initiative. There's a lot of good moments. And so it is the characters. It's the characters that carry this. It's the character story that you're most interested in. And it's how these characters are able to use their relationships and what makes them uniquely Jedi or people, citizens of the Republic, that ultimately is the driving force behind the narrative. And I thought that was a different swing, maybe not one that's as exciting, but ultimately one that I thought paid off pretty well. So let's get into our final scores here. Out of 5, Sanak, what would you rate Temptation of the Force?
I personally don't think I can rate this as highly as Eye of Darkness. You're in the middle chapter of the story, and it feels the most middle of chapters that we've gotten out of any of the High Republic books. But because it focused so much on characterizations, any of the plot elements that came out of it were really well earned. I would give this a 3.75 out of 5.
That's a great score to give it, because that's the same one I wrote down as we usually are with these reviews. Very similar takes, but it is a really good book. Mostly everybody who's enjoyed the High Republic thus far will enjoy. Obviously, as we're getting closer and closer to the end, we literally only have one more adult book in this franchise. You can't pick up here and read. This is a book that's earned by the time we've spent with these characters, which has been ample at this point. 3 years with these characters, and I do think it pays off in that regard. But it is a slower book, and it's one that is certainly not as heart-pounding as we're used to with a lot of the events of the High Republic. So hopefully you enjoyed our review. If you haven't read it, let us know if this review helped you out. If you have read it, let us know what you think of the book. Thank you so much for watching this video. Like the video down below, helps us out with the channel. Subscribe for more High Republic coverage. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you all next time.